Our next speaker is another Jeff, who is no stranger to the narrow gauge group. And Jeff is a retired architect who has been with the hobby since year 2000. He started in HO, scratch building modified versions of fine scale miniature kits, and from ads in the railroad magazines, and running his DNRGW and Santa Fe collection, local collection, on other people's layouts. He switched over to the dark side and now models in SN3. Jeff is an avid scratch builder, and he has won numerous awards, at national conventions for his models and his prototype photography. He is building an enormous layout now, and which depicts the Chile line from Chama to Santa Fe. Jeff was a clinic chairman for the last two St. Louis narrow gauge conventions and was the overall chair for the last two symposiums, SN3 symposiums, that were held in St. Louis. And with that, let me introduce Jeff, who is sitting right next to me.
This is probably old news to a lot of people, but I think we spend a lot of time working on detailed structures and detailing boxcars and what have you. And at the same time, I think we kind of pass over, what kind of impact the landscaping and the trees can make on the layout. I originally worked with a HO group that had a traveling layout, and we were at a national convention in Kansas City, and all the comments were about how realistic the trees looked. And I think that was because the trees were much bigger than a lot of modelers build on their layouts. So with that, I'm going to kind of start our presentation. This is some of the kind of trees that I'm going to cover. And these are really more kind of foreground trees. A lot of people look at trees as kind of background, set back on a mountaintop or what have you. But you really need to bring the trees into the foreground so that they're up and part of the overall layout image. This is just another view of the kind of myriad of trees we're going to cover: aspens, various types of pine trees, as well as deciduous trees. Okay. These are the three pine trees that we're going to cover: the basic bottle brush tree, the furnace filter tree, and then the one on the right is a Pride of Madera, which is kind of a low shrub that started out in the Mediterranean and gravitated over to become part of the California highway structure. So to get a Caspia bloom, which they're kind of a bluish purple tint, you need to really find a friend in California to be able to kind of ship you the dry armatures. First, we want to start out with the armature that we're going to use for our pine trees. And this is basically just a cedar shake shingle, because I model in S and SN3. The normal standard cedar shingle is a little too thin. It's only about half an inch at the base of the shingle, compared to what these are called our heavies, which are about 3/4 of an inch. And if you travel around and look at the new subdivisions being built, an awful lot of them are using cedar shake shingles. So you can probably pick up, if you talk kindly to one of the contractors, a couple of them will give you 30 or 40 trees. But at the same time, you're not going to spend a lot of bucks if you just go to a specialty lumber yard and get a pallet of cedar shake shingles. So because the shingle's tapered on two sides already, you need to add two more tapers, and basically you can see I've drawn lines on the shingle itself to give you a 4-sided taper, which is the one on the far right. And then with a bandsaw, I nip off the 90-degree corners so that you've got an 8-sided, so that there's much less filing to go through. And since cedar is relatively soft, but at the same time, the point stays pretty strong, it basically gives you a very nice textured trunk. And using a razor saw, you can basically, using a rough rasp, a razor saw, you can basically create a very nice texture. And then using a dowel and drilling a hole in it, just slightly larger than the finishing nails that you're going to use at the base of each of these trunks, you have something to hold on to when you're painting so that you're not painting your hand. You want to cut off the head of the finishing nail and then drill a hole in the base of these things. And that gives you the ability to then stand these trunks up in a 2x4 that's about, cut off about a 6-inch length of it. It gives you a real nice space to hold these as you construct it. Okay. These are some of the paints that I've used. Unfortunately, the Flocal spray cans are no longer available, to my demise, but you can go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby or some of the local hardware stores and pick up a can of what they call Design Masters, which is a paint that's used for florists and using dry floral arrangements. And there's a myriad of colors available as well as in the camouflage flat colors that Rust-Oleum makes. We're going to apply all of our flocking with a product that's been around since the 60s, and it's called Aquanet Unscented. Make sure you get the unscented or it'll spray, your trees will smell like any kind of perfume, and get the extra super hold. And I've had trees that are 20 years old and nothing's fallen off of them. This stuff is unbelievable that it's still on the market and that women will actually use it. Okay. These are some of the flocking materials that I use. These are products from AMSI, which on the left had a myriad of colors and grains and various other colors. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if that product is still available. We've searched the website and have not been able to locate it, but I'm sure there's got to be some. It primarily was an architectural product for model building, but Woodland Scenics sells similar products, not quite as many colors. The leaf material is available from Walters. It's a German product, Knock, and we're going to use Arlene's Fast Grab Tacky Glue to adhere an awful lot of our stuff together. The furnace filter trees start out with a product that's called Hog's Breath, and it's a furnace filter that you can find. The blue that's on the top with the netting is available at Lowe's and Home Depot. Comes in about a 20 by 30 sheet, and it's for people that want to make their own furnace filters for specialty occasions. So you want to take off that netting material. You'll see it'll look like the product on the left. I tear off hunks of these, pre-spray them with various brown colors so that there's minimal amount of painting that you have to do for the branch material later on. You want to, like I say, stand up your armature in a block of 2x4 that you pre-drilled. The nail then that's in the trunk or the base of the armature allows you a very stable platform, because you're going to tear off hunks of that furnace filter material. And I think a mistake that a lot of people have is that you don't ever want to have a set of shears or scissors in your workshop when you're doing this, because when you start cutting these things off, it starts to create a very artificial effect. What you want to do is really tear off triangular shaped pieces and then take the kind of stranded ends you can see that stick out, gives you a very kind of fine, flaky edge. And then you can slide the furnace filter down over the top of that cedar shake armature you've made. Paul Scholes used to make these out of balsa wood, but I'm not sure the balsa wood would hold up as you slide this thing down. You want to avoid creating kind of totally circular patterns. You want to kind of offset these things, maybe 3-sided, sometimes 4-sided at various layers, but definitely don't create kind of pie-shaped pieces that create a complete circle when you complete it around. The 2 trees on the right, or as well as these trees, show you the final finished effect that you'll get. In the fact that you've then got these things pre-sprayed with the brown material, you can simply go back, hold the armature in your left hand if you're right-handed, and with a rattle can, spray down parallel to the tree trunk, and you won't get much paint at all on the trunk, and you'll be able to kind of get rid of any of the blue cast that's, still on the furnace filter. The next step is to basically over a sheet of newspaper, spray it with the hairspray from both the top and the bottom, do a light coating on the bottom, a heavier coat on the top, but believe me, try to do it with minimal flocking material, because you want to be able to see through this. You don't want to create any kind of dense material so that the tree has kind of an airy and open look. And on the tree on the right, all these trees normally in nature have some dead branches on the very bottom of it. So you want to leave kind of the natural brown without any flocking on the lower kind of set of branches. There's a product out there called fine leaf foliage that's made by Woodland Scenics. And it's almost like super trees that they sprayed gray and they pre-flocked it. Oh, well, it's got a very heavy flocking, but this is what we're going to use to create our Pride of Madera tree. The Pride of Madera tree on the left is the armature that's left after all the flowers have been taken off of the actual bloom. These blooms are pretty big. They're probably at least a minimum 4 inches high, and with the armature itself, they're probably about 10 to 12 inches high. You need to get rid of all the kind of little fuzzy stuff that's on the armatures and on the branches. And you can kind of pre-shape them a little bit now with some scissors at the top to get, a little more taper. But these armatures are very fragile since they're dry, and you want to be careful. So the product on the bottom is this fine leaf foliage, and you can see it's very dense. And I think it is just a super tree painted and flocked. And then you start taking off little chunks from this bulky material. And then with Arlene's Fast Tack glue, spread a little bit on each of the, several of the branches, and then take a small section and then start building up the foliage on each of those, starting at the bottom and moving up. If you're missing some armatures, usually if you get a friend to be able to send you, a box of these things, which weighs nothing when they ship it, there's usually a bunch of dead pieces of the branch material laying in the bottom. And with a pin vise, you can drill another couple holes and fill in where you got a blank spot. So this is what you end up, as you build this thing up from the bottom up, and it creates a very very nice looking, not necessarily, I think, a pure pine tree, but it gives you something kind of between a pine tree and a deciduous tree. And depending on how you shape these things, they can look either more like a pine or more like a deciduous tree. But the normal aperture itself, the bark texture is there, the color is there, and you have no painting involved in this at all. You can also use these Pride of Madera to create, this is a photograph off of Pete's layout, where it simulates, some of the dead pine trees, which are all part of the forest. And it gives you a nice mixture of currently growing pine trees, as well as trees that are past their prime and died. This is a version of that same armature that we use for the furnace filter trees, but you take a pin vise or I use a Dremel tool with a drill bit that's just slightly larger than the branches that are on this Caspia plant. And you can get this Caspia material, again, in Michael's. A lot of this material comes from Hobby Lobby and Michael's. Drill a bunch of holes, with your Dremel tool or your pin vise. And once you drill the holes, I found that if you don't go back over with India ink and alcohol, which I do on all these pine tree armatures, there'll be a white circle from the drill bit that it doesn't quite cover the armature of the Caspia. So by going back over with a coating of India ink and alcohol, it kills the white part, and you basically take the Caspia, pre-spray it with the green color that you want to use. And I find that the texture of the Caspia is so fine that on the branch material that you really don't have to go back and flock it. You can if you want, but all of mine are just the natural Caspia material, starting at the top and working down. You basically take a pair of your favorite tweezers and simply insert a piece of the Caspia that you've broken off, the size starting at the smallest and moving down to the largest. And you normally don't have to apply any kind of glue to hold this armature in. You can, if you want, take a little carpenter's glue, dip the tip of it in, and as you insert it into the armature material itself, it'll guarantee that it won't move around. And then, as I mentioned before, you can see at the base of these Caspia trees, the dead branches that are there on all these kind of pine trees. And that's simply the Caspia armature without any of the kind of leafy material that creates those. And they're almost the same brown color that you're going to need without spraying it. Next one. So these are just another example of that finished product of the Caspia pines. And these are pretty similar to the kind of pine trees that you'll see on the Pacific Northwest. These are the materials that you're going to use for the aspen trees I make. And I think these are the kind of trees that a lot of people, when you end up with a tree, it ends up like a lollipop because they use kind of polyfoam and what have you. And there's no way you're going to get it airy enough looking. So I use basically an armature that I construct out of a floral stem wire. And these are 20 gauge. You get like 30 strands of this stem wire that are about 18 inches long. Again, this comes from Michael's. The 26 gauge, 28 gauge floral wire, we're going to wrap around clumps of these stem wires. And then again, we use a finishing nail that you cut off the head. We're going to paint the armature itself with Tamiya flat white. You can use, it's an acrylic paint. You can use any flat white. I know aspens are not white. They're really kind of a light gray, greenish material. Okay, go to the next one. So these are the kind of steps that we're going to go through. First of all, we take a cluster of these stem wires, and I use a mixture of the 20 gauge and some 22 gauge and 24 gauge. It comes in 3 or 4 different gauges. And you have need to have a minimum of about 9 of these in your cluster. I usually like to have about 12 to 15. And you take these and you put them in basic cluster column, take a dab of super glue, put it on your finishing nail, put it in the base of the armature, and that ensures that the nail won't pull out later. And then start wrapping this cluster with the 28 gauge floral wire. And you don't have to be real careful. In fact, if you have a little overlap here and there, as you can see on the second from the right, when you wrap it with a material that's another floral product, it's a floral tape that's comes in white and it comes in green. I use the white. It's about a little more than 1/4 of an inch wide, and it has a kind of tacky feel to it. So that as you wrap it around, it sticks to itself, and it creates a nice texture when you get finished. And you wrap that up with both the floral wire and the floral tape to the point where you want to start your limb structure. And when you get to that point, you take 2 or 3 of those strands and break them off at an angle and wrap those together so that what you're going to create is kind of a basket structure. So when you've created this basket structure, it's then easy to take clumps of the super tree material, slide it down into that basket, and you've created kind of a limb structure with that basket, and that holds the super tree material in without having to use any glue. And I say, when you reach the point where you've reached that point you've wrapped it with the floral tape, you've gotten the limb structure. I hand paint these with a 1/4 inch, paintbrush, and white paint takes no more than a minute or 2 to paint these. You could spray paint them, but you'd waste about 95% of the paint. So it takes little to no time to paint them. And then I use various shades of the knock material, the leaf material. You can kind of super detail the trunk with a pointed black marker to create the kind of black spots you see on it. But you can see on the left and the green tree on the second to the left, you want to be able to see through the tree. You want to be able to see the limb structure through the tree. And that gets rid of all the kind of problems that are inherent with trying to use kind of the polyfoam material. And you can also vary the kind of coloration. You can create a forest of aspens that are starting to change color, or some of them are still the golden, and some of them are the just starting to go from the green to the golden. And just like with the pine trees, you want to create some variation in the trees. You don't want to have every tree that's the same color. The old saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. You'll have a uniform looking forest, but the trees are all be a little different in color and texture to the point where you'll get some distinctive differences, and I think a much nicer looking effect when it's overall. The next one. This shows you just kind of the finished product, the basket material, and sliding the the super tree material over that. You don't have to paint the super tree material white. I mean, it'll look fine, this kind of brownish color when you get finished. Okay. So this gives you an overall effect of, what you'll end up with, for the aspen tree when you get finished with the product. Just another shot of those. Okay. Okay, and when you mix the pine trees, the aspen trees together, you can create really an effect where the trees become really part of the foreground rather than just part of the background, where you can bring them into the area where most people can really appreciate the effect of the trees intermixed with your structures, the track work, and the rest of your scenery. Okay. These are some of the landscape materials, again, the AMSI products, the knock leaf structures that are available from Walters. Okay. These are some deciduous trees that I made using sagebrush. Sagebrush is not as uniform as one would hope. The ones on the right were actually armatures that I bought from Sweetwater, and they had a product that looks almost like the trees out in California, the lone pines, and they had like a secret location where they never disclosed where they got those from. But on the left is an armature that I've made that by taking 2 or 3 different pieces of the sagebrush and at the crotch of the tree, creating my own armatures using super glue you'll get the same effect, overall effect. Basically using, again, super tree clumps, using the Arlene's Fast Track glue and gluing on various pieces of that super tree, and then flocking it with, again, the AMSI product. And what I like to do is take it and lightly dust the top of the various flocked material with a lighter color of that, so that it gives the effect of sunlight that's shining on the top of the trees.
Mhm.
Next one, please. So this gives you just the overall effect of when you intermix, the aspen trees, the pine trees. I think it creates a very natural looking forest for your layout. Okay. This is something where I'm kind of infringing on John McKenzie. He's going to do a clinic, I'm told, later on sometime this year or next year. And I bought from him the McKenzie Brothers Timber Company tree making machine. This was about the 10th version of a tree making machine that they created some 20 years ago that I think cost $20 at the time, that his brother Mike McKenzie built the tree making machines. John McKenzie still makes trees commercially. And this is one that is, like I say, about their 10th version. They even had one that was motorized where you didn't have to manually crank, but it allows you to make the furnace filter trees by creating tension on the two wires that hold everything together once you twist it. And when you put the hemp rope fiber in, when you start twisting it, the fibers don't fall out. I talked to John just about a week ago, and he mentioned that they have not made these for about over 2 or 3 years, and because his brother was one making these. I don't know if you could sweet talk him into making another one, but he said he would have available about 10 to 20 prints of how to build one of these things. The black apparatus on the left-hand side is just a clamp that clamps the wires on that as you fit it through, clamps them down. The wires run through to the back side of the other vertical piece, wrap around a peg, and then when you have everything in it, you crank it and it creates a twist. And then it creates the bottle brush. Next one. So the bottle brush trees, the difference between what I do and John does, John creates all his fiber material the same length and then goes back and trims them. I start out with the longest length that I'm going to need, and then as I create the next clump that goes in, they're about 1/4 of an inch shorter. And what it does is it gives you kind of, again, a fuzzy edge. It doesn't create a fine toothed edge. So the one on the left is how it looks as you twist it and it comes out of the machine. The one on the right of that is where I've taken a piece of that armature material that I use for the pine trees, drill a hole in it large enough that you can insert the wire, and then cut off a piece about 2 to 3 inches long, whatever length you want for the base of your pine tree. Otherwise, this spindly looking trunk. And then the ones on the right have just been flocked, again, with AMSI products that have been sprayed with the hairspray, and again, highlighted with a lighter color. Next one. This just shows you the short version of the armature material where you then slide your finished tree into it so that you have a total looking tree. And this is basically the kind of forest that you'll have when you get finished, which I hope everybody realizes that the trees are just as important part of your layout as your locomotives and your structures, because I think this is what you see when you look at that layout first and foremost, can give either make or break your lab. Again, thanks for the time for letting me present. And if there are any questions later, I'd be glad to answer them.